I never thought I would ever see the day when flipping someone's lawn would lead to handcuffs. But there she was, Patricia Wilson, better known in our neighborhood as Karen, the president of hell, from the HOA, standing in her front yard, screaming at the top of her lungs while two police officers inspected sections of her once immaculate lawn, which were now deliberately flipped upside-down brown roots in the middle of the sky. Her perfectly highlighted blonde bob bounced wildly as she waved at me, face twisted with anger, mascara beginning to smudge. I stood peacefully with my arms folded, observing the drama unfold. I had warned her several times. She had refused to pay. Now her tiny bit of green had somehow escalated into a criminal investigation, and I couldn't help but feel a little satisfaction as I observed karma finally catching up with the neighborhood bully. 6 months prior, everything had begun normally enough. I've been operating Green Dreams Landscaping for nearly 8 years now, working in some of the most high-end neighborhoods in town. Most of my clients are wonderful people who appreciate quality work and pay promptly. Then there was Patricia Wilson of Oakwood Estates, the most expensive subdivision in our area, with an HOA notorious for its ridiculous rules and hefty fines. As board president, Patricia wielded her power like a sword, and I'd heard stuff about her from other service professionals, but the potential contract was too good to miss. I expect utter perfection, she had insisted in our initial consultation, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed her already spotless yard. The HOA has standards, and as president, my home needs to be the gold standard. She spoke so patronizingly that I almost walked out at the time, but instead I smiled professionally and reassured her that perfection was exactly what Green Dreams delivered. We agreed on a complete yard makeover, new sod, landscape design, irrigation system, upgrade the projects. The contract was large, and for all my worries about working for Patricia, I was anticipating the project. The grips started around as soon as we began work. Patricia would arrive whenever my men and I were working, shadowing us, questioning our methods, demanding changes to the designs we had worked out. "That shrub is half an inch too high," she'd snap. "That piece of grass isn't quite the same shade of green the first wanted." Know how I defended professional landscaping practices, she always knew best. However, we made the changes, everything was noted, and the work proceeded. The actual issue began when the first payment came due. "I'm not paying all of this," she said with a flick of her manicured hand. "The work is not to my satisfaction." When I asked for specifics, she cited imperfections that did not exist, saying the irrigation wasn't working properly. It was the sod wasn't going in correctly. It was perfect. And the layout wasn't what she had signed. It was identical to our signed documents. Hours of back and forth, and she finally wrote a check for 60% of the amount owed, promising the rest once the problems were resolved. We finished the project in spite of her ongoing interference, and the outcome was breathtaking. Even Patricia couldn't see obvious faults. Her yard was now the showpiece property she envisioned, with flawless emerald grass, exquisite landscaping, and a state-of-the-art irrigation system. But when it was time for the last payment, Patricia suddenly became unreachable too. I called, went unanswered, emails went unread. When I finally spoke to her in person, she said she was going over the work and would get around to it when she had time. Weeks turned into a month, and still nothing. I sent official invoices followed by polite reminders, then furious warnings. I tried calling, texting, emailing, even visiting her home. Nothing worked. Finally, I received an email that made my blood boil. After scrutinizing it thoroughly, she wrote, "I detected numerous inadequacies in your work which will require considerable correction before anything further can be paid. Also, I'm set to report to the HOA board about your company's substandard practices. Perhaps you should contemplate a different profession." That was all. All the extra work materials, the quality work, she wasn't just denying me payment for, but defaming my reputation and career. I gave her one last chance, sending a legal notice detailing the work done, the payment receipt, and a 5-day notice to pay the balance of $4,825. Her response, a text message saying, "I'll report you to the HOA for damaging my property if you call me again." Know your place. I'm not usually an angry person, but something in me snapped. I spoke to my lawyer, who advised that technically until the final payment was made, the materials installed remained my property, including the sod. The next morning I arrived at Patricia's house with two of my most trusted workers. In plain view of her security cameras, we systematically cut perfect rectangles out of her lawn and flipped them over, making a checkerboard pattern of green grass and brow. Roots exposed. We didn't steal anything, we merely flipped it. It was oddly satisfying work, and we were finished within an hour. We were loading our tools when Patricia's luxury SUV spun into the driveway. She leapt from the car, face already red with fury. "What did you do to my lawn?" she yelled, her voice echoing down the street. "This is vandalism. This is destruction of property. You're never going to work in this town again." Neighbors began peering out windows as she raved on pulling out phone. "I'm calling 911 right now. You're going to jail for this." I remained calm, which only irritated her further. "Patricia," I told evenly, "this is only a demonstration of what can occur when you fail to water your lawn properly. Once you settle that overdue bill, I'll be happy enough to come back and fix it." Her face contorted with such rage that for an instant, I wondered if she might even try to assault me. Instead, she turned her ire on her phone, dramatically reporting a violent vandal destroying her property. When two police officers were there 15 minutes later, Patricia launched into her version of events before they had even been able to drive out of their car. She characterized me as an incompetent contractor trying to blackmail for substandard work, then vandalizing her property when she had properly refused payment. The officers heard her out, then reached for my side of things. Peacefully, I pulled out my phone and showed them the entire documented history. Our signed contract work-in-progress photos, her written change orders, the partial payment, all my attempts to obtain the balance due, and her threatening phone calls. I made it clear that according to our agreement, unpaid materials were mine, and I had simply reinstalled my sod to stress the importance of proper care. I hadn't destroyed anything. All could be simply replaced once payment was received. One of the officers, trying not to stifle a grin, asked Patricia about the payment record. Her account immediately began shifting. First, she claimed she'd paid in full. When I prepared the invoice reports, she modified to requiring work to be defective. When the officers asked for specific instances, she became upset and started mentioning principal and being the HOA president. That's when something weird happened. A neighbor came up to Robert from across the street, who I'd occasionally greeted while working on Patricia's property. "Officers," he explained, "I've been watching how she treats service workers for years. This isn't an isolated incident." He told him he'd seen Patricia screaming at delivery drivers, housekeepers, and other contractors, constantly making excuses not to pay in full. Another neighbor came then, another, both with the same stories. The officers stepped aside for a private discussion, then returned with serious faces. "Miss Wilson," one of them said, "based on the documentation and witness statements, this is a civil matter of non-payment for services rendered. However, we're concerned about a pattern of behavior that could amount to theft of services from several vendors." Patricia's face bled of color. "That's absurd. I'm the president of the HOA. Do you know who I am in this subdivision?" Her voice had taken on a desperate edge. The officer continued, unfazed by her status assertions. "We're also concerned about the possibly false report to the emergency services. Filing a false report is a criminal offense." What had started as a simple argument over grass had suddenly uncovered years of Patricia's entitled behavior. As the officers continued to question her, they disclosed more. She had evidently been in using her HOA position to strong-arm several service providers hiring a job and then coming up with excuses not to pay. Not only my gardening business, it was the swimming pool service, holiday lighting installer, even the homeowner's security installer system. Patricia had been asked to come in for additional questioning. While that she was being escorted down to the patrol car, not handcuffed yet, but clearly in trouble, she sneered at me with hatred. "You've mistake," she snarled as she stormed by. "When this is all over, I'll own your business." I just shook my head. "All you needed to do was pay your bill, Patricia." 3 weeks later, I received the news Patricia had been officially charged with theft of services over $10,000 from a number of vendors, filing a false police report and attempted extortion for threatening vendors with HOA action. The potential penalties were severe, up to 2 years in prison and fines of up to $25,000. The HOA board had voted unanimously her out as president, and her real estate brokerage put her on administrative leave, pending the outcome of the case. I again saw her prior to her arraignment at the neighborhood coffee shop. Her designer dresses replaced with something more modest. Her perfect highlights grown out her imperious deflated air. When we locked eyes, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. She opened her mouth as though to say something, then seemed to have a better idea. It collected its belongings.